So in a previous video, I went over what is affordable housing, how can you get affordable housing. In this video, I'm going to be talking about pros and cons of why you want affordable housing, and then all the tips that I have for you to lock down affordable housing. Definitely check out my previous video over here if you want to see how to get into that. And also, it's also affordable housing. I did it the same exact process for medium income tax abatement for 421A. Our landlord gets 421A tax abatement for putting up this apartment along with 2 other units in the building for affordable housing. And it's not necessarily like a dingy, low income, poorly maintained, very old government building. It's a nice new construction building, and you can get it for a lot cheaper for just doing affordable housing. So just bear with me here, and we're gonna go through the pros and cons and some tips that we have. So the first offer, the pros, is that I want to mention that when it comes to the pros, a lot of people think that you may need to verify your income after you've just signed your lease, but you actually don't need to. When I re-signed my lease, all they did was just send me another lease. I didn't even have to re-verify my income, so I can eventually be a millionaire and still be in the same apartment. And then the other thing is that I can also include other people in my lease. I had to meet the income requirement when it came to getting the actual affordable housing, but when it came to renewing or maybe even adding people later on, they don't actually check to see if they are above or below or even within the income requirement. They just add them on, no problem, as long as they had income to really pay for the rent. So that's something that you can consider. That's actually what I did. My apartment was really for a specific income range. The moment my boyfriend joined on, we would have definitely been above that income range. So what we ended up doing was I went in first, and then 2 months later I added him in, and he was fine. When we re-signed the lease, his name was on it, so it's not necessarily just like illegally here. The other thing is that you don't have application or broker fees. These apartments are not going to be on the markets like Street Easy or Zillow or anything like that. You have to look at the HPD affordable housing portal. Definitely check out my video if you want to see how to do that. I included an entire process of how you would do it right now. So also another thing you want to note is that's below market rate. I mentioned this before. My apartment was like around $2,800 to $3,000 for the same exact unit in the same building for those that are not affordable housing. But for me, when it's affordable housing, it was like $2,250. So that's like knocking down $600 to $800 alone. Not to mention, it's also rent stabilized. So even though theirs is going to go up maybe $100, $200, like the landlord has no limit to how much they can increase it. But under the affordable housing, they actually have like a limit of 1.5 to 2%. Usually the city is the one that dictates this right as the highest ceiling you can go. This is really, it's not rent controlled, it's rent stabilized. That way you can get rent stabilized rent that it just is stabilized, you know? It's not necessarily gonna be whoop, all the way up. It's not like low income housing where the moment you sign the lease, that's the price you pay up until the time you leave. I know someone who actually lives in low income housing in Lower East Side, 2-bedroom, and it was $1,000 20 years ago. They're still paying $1,000 for that same apartment. And that's something that you can do if you're low income. But right now, if you went for the same unit, it's going to be higher. But for us, it's rent stabilized. So you're still going to be staying around the same range, but it's not going to go the same exact price. It's not rent controlled, it's rent stabilized. And then lastly, it is new construction and it's renovated. So you're not necessarily going for an old dilapidated building. You're going for a new building that looks really fancy. And a lot of the ones that you're going to see on the website are also like, they have so many cool amenities. I'm just like, I wish I checked those. I wish I had other kind of buildings like that, but I chose this particular building because it fit my income range, and it's also close to the city. And it's also Williamsburg. There's a lot of other buildings on that list that are not in hot neighborhoods like Williamsburg. You're gonna see some like Upper West Side, you're gonna see like in Bushwick, you're gonna see a lot of other places that may not be hot neighborhoods. But once you find one that's a hot neighborhood, you better apply because you already know other people are gonna apply too. So here are some cons for going for affordable housing. And the other thing, this is something that I had to deal with this a lot, is you have to surrender your previous lease or residence. So when I went in for my apartment here, I actually moved in for April 1st lease start. And my lease from the previous apartment actually ended in August, which means that I had like an extra 4 months of my lease before I did it. And the thing about affordable housing is you really want to jump on it. You're not gonna have an opportunity this much because you have to go, it's like there's so many hoops you have to jump for. You have to reach the lottery, you have to fill out all the documentation, you have to be qualified, and then they also have to be able to choose you out of everyone else based off of the lottery. So I would definitely jump into it, even if you may need to surrender your lease. So a lot of places, because of this, So what I mean by surrender your lease is you can't sublet. You have to actually end your lease, break lease. So this means that you may have to go through, work with your landlord. What are the possibilities? What can you do to break lease? For me, it was easy, as simple as finding someone else to do a new lease. We didn't do like a lease replacement or lease assignment. It was just a whole new lease that actually was financially qualified for my apartment and also was able to start their lease the moment I was going to move out. So fortunately, I was able to do that. Unfortunately, I also had to pay for a broker because it was definitely running out of time. Otherwise, I would have paid 2 months of rent at the same exact time, and I did not want to do that. So the other thing is that it may take a long time. Like I mentioned before, I applied like back in July or August of 2019. I started hearing in like November of 2019. So that's about 4 months or so. And then after that, you also have to go through all the documentation, your interview, and then you have to go through the entire process. And that was beginning of March. So when I knew I got the apartment, that's beginning of March. So think about that. That's like 4 months right there, 8 months for the entire process. It may be longer for you. It really depends on how long the city takes, maybe how many units there are in the building, because this also means that they may take more people as well. And then also go through all the documentation. In general, the documentation will always be the same. So you can always prepare your documentation ahead of time. And I want to go more into that later on in the tips later in the video. The other thing is that you're relying on the lottery. So if you are the first person to apply, you are going to be first in the lottery. You also need to be qualified. So that's what your profile will need to dictate. And then not only that, you also need to be, sometimes they stop the lottery as well based off of the number of applicants they have and they're trying to see. If they see that they're not qualified, they'll still keep going on. So something you'll notice is like for me, my lot number was 7,000 something. I was like, I got this apartment for being 7,000. That means 7,000 people before me either were not interested at the time, because again, you could be waiting and at the time, maybe you just don't want to leave your apartment, or maybe you don't even want to be in New York anymore. 7,000 people before me either was not interested or they were not qualified. That was mind-boggling. So I'm going to include all the tips that I have for you to have your highest chance possible to get affordable housing. Number one is already create your profile now. Do it right now. If you're not even interested in affordable housing right now, creating a profile will make things so much easier right now, because it just makes things as easy as you look at a listing and then you apply. It's also accumulate all your annual documents like your W-2s, your tax returns, your letters of employment, all of that. You can keep that as a folder in your computer. Those are the ones that you're going to always need. The ones that are more monthly are based off of the time that you're being selected. That one you could wait for later. So that could be like your 3 past pay stubs. You may have to show that, but then if you do that well before, you're gonna have to re-download your pay stubs anyway. So you might as well just wait for those, but you can prepare your annual documents now. Put them all in a folder and then you're done there. So once you get selected, you also can just pull in your bank statements, pull in your pay stubs, pull in all of those, pull in your utility bills, pull in your bill payments for your rent as well, and then just drop that into the folder and you're good. So at that point, you're pretty much set at the time that you're selected. The other thing that you need to be cognizant of is that they prefer New York City residents. So if you are maybe like in Ohio and you want to move to New York because you know you're going to be in New York for maybe a job after college, they're going to prefer New York City residents. And I'm talking about specifically New York City residents. If you're like in upstate New York or you're in Long Island, you're not necessarily considered a New York City resident. What I recommend you to do is first move into New York City, get in an apartment with roommates or sublet or something like that, and then start applying, because then you have a New York City residence and they're going to prefer you because they would prefer to use New York City residents. So that's something to be in consideration. The other thing is, like I mentioned before, it's a lottery. So it's not something that is completely out of control. What I recommend you to do is, like I mentioned before, create your profile and you're done. And then check frequently, maybe every week, look at all the new lotteries out there. They actually get updated very quickly. Like maybe every day I've noticed new lotteries out there. So if you are noticing that there's a new lottery, apply immediately. Make sure you're qualified first. If you go in unqualified, you're gonna waste your time. If you go unqualified, you know for sure that if you are early in the lottery, you will be called. So that is gonna increase your chances of being called. So if you just keep on applying on ones that you're interested in, you're pretty much set. So a way to tell is that the photos that you're going to see on their website are going to show you how the building looks like, and they're real photos. They're not going to be virtual renderings. So you can kind of have a sense of like where you will be living and how you will be living. So that is a good way to just apply and you don't have to worry about it. What I recommend though is that if you're not really familiar with the area, still go ahead of time and explore the area before you apply, because it will suck if you're going through the entire process, you're going to the open house and now you're here like, I wasted all my time for this. So something that I liked about Williamsburg is that I knew about Williamsburg before I applied. That way I knew that, okay, I knew this is the place for me. I didn't have to go here and then all of a sudden when I go for an open house after I've done all of the freaking paperwork, I'm not kind of catfished. I'm like, oh, this building looks amazing, but it's in a really bad neighborhood. So think about it that way, because sometimes when it comes to new developers, they're always going to be looking for gentrifying areas, and also maybe in areas where it's like very dense in population or very dense in construction or trash or anything like that, because they bought the place for cheap and then they renovated it. So that's something to keep in mind when you're trying to look at property. So look at the neighborhoods first, maybe even ask people, look online before you apply so you don't waste your time. The other thing is get your paperwork in ASAP. So even though it's a lottery, if you get your paperwork in ASAP, you're pretty much set. For us, it was basically, I had the paperwork in and then I also had the open house. There was a decent number of people here. And then I saw that there was like over 10 couples that were just there for that one showing, which means I had 10 couples to compete against 3 apartments that were up for affordable housing. And out of those 10, it's not about your lottery number at this point. It's about who claims the apartment and who has the paperwork in as early as possible. So that's a way that you can beat it, but you have to get all your paperwork and you have to be really good with all of that. And definitely it's gonna be a long game, but it's really gonna be worth it because you can save a lot of money. If I rented the same exact apartment for $2,800, $3,000, which is average in New York City for a 1-bedroom apartment, that's gonna be an additional $600 to $800 I could be spending alone on rent than if I had this rent stabilized affordable housing apartment. So $800, think about that, every year will be 12 months of $800. $9,600 you're throwing out of the window because you didn't want to do the paperwork and you didn't want to do all the legwork on this. So highly recommend you to do this. These are all my tips I have. These are the pros and cons. And something that I also want to mention, and this is probably going to be not that common because I know a lot of people want to stay in these apartments, is that if you're trying to leave your apartment here, you actually have to go through the entire process where the government goes back into lottery. So this means that you're on the hook to pay rent until they find someone else. So my boyfriend and I are currently in this situation where we're trying to move to our condo, but we actually delayed our closing process as much as possible. So that way the government can find someone. We started the process back like 2 months ago and they're still looking for someone. So typically when we wanted to move out, we could, but we have to pay for this rent and then that rent or mortgage payment in our situation. So that's something you have to keep in mind of. It's not like how most places where if you want to break lease, you just need to find someone to take over or to just take over for the new lease, but you have to go back to the government and they're snail pace, so you have to rely on that and also be prepared to do that. But again, not a lot of people want to leave affordable housing because it's just such a great deal, but in our situation we had to do that. And this is like one of the negatives of being in affordable housing for us, is because the government has to go through the lottery again. So that's something you need to keep in mind of if maybe you do want to leave New York City because another job is out there in like California, or maybe you want to move out and then live with your family, or like maybe you want to move and buy a place like us. That is something to keep in mind. So that's all I have in terms of pros and cons and some tips that I have for affordable housing. And let me know down below if you found this helpful, and let me know if you end up getting an affordable housing based off of this video. Definitely check out my video over here if you want to learn more about how to actually apply. The process has changed a little bit. The website is actually a lot more updated than before, so you're going to see a lot more photos. Before I had to go to StreetEasy and stalk those addresses to see how it looked. That would have been a tip I provide now, but not anymore because the website's a lot more user friendly. If you like more of these kind of videos in real estate and money, definitely check out my playlist over here. I really want to provide more content for young millennial working professionals. So these are the kind of videos I want to make that way you can really invest in your money, get really cheap housing, and also go into real estate eventually, but also work on your career skills and also get into technology consulting. So please like this video if you liked and you got value out of this video, and also subscribe for more of this content. Thank you so much and see you guys next time. Bye.